in case you don't know what you're here for, this is the Future of DSA plenary. I'll read the description. The organization is at a critical moment for deciding how we move forward to build a working class party. Looking at the challenges we've had and the present political stakes, what kind of socialist organization does the current political moment call for, and how do we build that organization? The plenary session draws on the experience of members from across the org as they share visions for building a sustainable socialist movement. So yeah, I'm gonna sit, I'll give our panelists a chance to introduce themselves, and then we'll get into it. Hello again. Here with me I have some folks who have been, pretty deeply involved in DSA over the years. People who have been on the NPC, who have, seen all of it. We have Kristian Hernandez, my fellow NPC member on the current NPC. Sean Estelle, fellow NPC member on the former NPC. Riddiough, how you doing? From the 2017 to 2019 NPC, and has been around the organization much longer than that. And Jake Colosa, what's up, Jake? Also on the current NPC and outgoing YDSA co-chair. I can give you all a couple minutes to just intro yourselves. So we'll start with Kristian.
Hello. I will keep it brief because I feel like I've been on a mic this entire weekend. I am Kristian. I use she, her pronouns. I'm based in North Texas. I've been a member of DSA since September of 2016. Joined shortly after being a national delegate for Bernie, attending the shit show that was the DNC in Philly, and realizing there had to be another way. But most importantly, I joined DSA because I was asked to join DSA by a comrade who had me sign a physical form and send in a check, which feels really old school, but definitely was the way that our local membership was able to grow. I have been a chapter co-chair for 2 years in 2016 through 2018, and then was asked to run for the NPC and did that for the last 2 terms. And I'm really, really looking forward to not being on the NPC and getting back to business, because Texas is a bit of a shit show, and I'd like to go back to doing local work. So thank you.
Thanks, Kristian. Thanks, Justin. Hi, y'all. My name is Sean Estelle. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a resident here in Chicago. Some say the greatest city in the world. I joined DSA on J20 in 2017. I had been a part of the left since 2011. I was part of the climate movement, an NGO staffer. And I saw mass arrests happening and a new political era, while also, the threat of climate change was looming ever larger. And I decided to join a mass organization and commit to making it my political home and making sure that we were stepping up to join the fight as Donald Trump took power and as we needed to have all hands on deck to build eco-socialism. So I spent 2 years on the NPC from 2019 to 2021 and just wrapped up a term as the campaigns coordinator of Chicago DSA and do not have a formal organizing role for the first time in nearly 12 years.
Hi, I'm Riddiough. I've been a member of DSA for 40 years, since it was formed. I should say my pronouns are she, her. I actually joined DSA by way of New American Movement, by way of the Chicago Women's Liberation Union, which was where I was first introduced to the idea of socialist feminism back in 1969. And in the Women's Union and later NAM, I learned a lot of the lessons that have helped me over the years be part of DSA. And I actually been thinking about a lot of the things that were said yesterday, and I'm very impressed with all of the ideas that people had and the way in which organizing is playing such an important part, because that's one of the key things I remember learning back in the day. I also don't want to forget to say I grew up in Milwaukee, so shout out to Milwaukee. I spent 15 years here in Chicago. You gotta love Chicago. Go out and get those Chicago beefs and sausages, and go to the Cubs game, you know. And I'm now in Metro DC DSA, top chapter, doing some great organizing, and I'm very happy to be part of that. And I'm the vice chair, I guess, of the DSA Fund board, which is the C3 sister of DSA.
Good morning, comrades. My name is Jake Colosa. I use he, they pronouns. I joined DSA in February 2019 through the YDSA for Bernie campaign. I was a student at NYU, and my chapter was visible on our campus, engaging students in this campaign, and that's what brought me to DSA. And through concerted mentorship by leaders in that chapter and plugging into New York City DSA and the campaigns they were running, that's how I came to realize the socialist politics that subconsciously I had all along. Since joining DSA, I've served on New York City DSA steering committee as the YDSA representative from April 2020 to September 2021. And for the past 2 years, I've served on YDSA's national coordinating committee, including as co-chair for the past year. After stepping down, now that my term's done, I will be starting my career as a public school teacher in New York City in the fall.
And those are our panelists. So let's get into some questions. So what we'll do with our time is we'll hear from the panelists, you know, I guess for about 45 minutes, around there, and then we'll open up for Q&A. And when we do Q&A, I think Anna's going to help us out with the mic. So cool. All right, let's get into it. So the first question, to succeed, DSA needs consistent, regular membership. What's the best way to move that goal forward? I will leave it to you to decide who talks.
I mean, I'm happy to. Well, I think it's going to be a really boring answer, but we have to do consistent active recruitment and active retention. We, on the Growth and Development Committee, are constantly trying to support chapters in developing mentorship and membership committees. In particular, I think Beth mentioned yesterday, had noticed that a lot of our chapters are having leadership bodies doing this work. And while it should be the job of everybody in the chapter to be recruiting people into the organization, to be giving people meaningful ways to be engaged in the campaigns that our chapters are waging, and making asks, right? As Ashik mentioned in his report, our most inconsistent way of funding the organization is through annual dues. So we want to make sure that we're moving folks into monthly dues, which then chapters are able to get the kickback of due share in a way that's also creating stability for the chapter. So it's really just the bread and butter work of asking people to join DSA, giving people a reason to stay in DSA, and making sure that's done in a methodical and structural way in the chapter.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add to that, I completely agree. We have to look at methodical and structural work, and then also take advantage of political conditions. We have to be opportunistic in a good way. Kristian talked about the recruitment work of the Growth and Development Committee, and one of the things that we did in 2020 with the presidential electoral cycle, with a potential coup and everything else that was happening, was engaging in a recruitment drive that was, I think, as everybody was dealing with the new organizing conditions that we were in because of the pandemic, trying to create a plan and sticking to that plan, and then being able to bring in tens of thousands of people in the course of a few weeks, and then taking that base of people and giving them the skills. And so that's the other thing too, is that consistent and regular membership comes from the leaders in the organization using every single meeting, every single one-on-one as an opportunity to be able to give somebody new skills, to bring them up a leadership ladder, the bread and butter work of organizing, and that never stops.
Well, I have only a few things to add to what Kristian and Sean have said, because I agree with them. But one of the things that I do want to add is that we have a good, strong focus on organizing that I think is important to bringing people in. But we need to tie that to this concept of outreach. And there's a paper that was written many years ago about outreach where it says, this was for the women's organization, outreach means getting to know a lot of people. It means bringing women's consciousness and politics into the everyday lives of people. And we could substitute bringing, socialist consciousness into the everyday lives of people. Goes on to say outreach is going to their house to meet with their group of friends rather than simply inviting them to a meeting at your house or at your office. And so we need to be part of the lives of people. We need to be friends with people so that they have both a political and social tie to the organization.
Yeah, just adding on to that, I think there's no path to growing DSA that doesn't involve running highly visible campaigns around issues that are widely and deeply felt. For example, at NYU YDSA this year, we ran a campaign to win abortion without cost, question, or delay on campus. And now tens of thousands of students at NYU have access to free abortion through the Student Health Center. And many of the members of our recently elected organizing committee are students whose doors we knocked in the fall. So we are taking students, politicizing them on issues, and bringing them into leadership. I think this is something that YDSA has done pretty well over the past few years as well. We've been able to grow over 150% over the past 3 years, despite members graduating out each year. And this growth is not happening at small liberal arts schools in the Northeast. Our largest YDSA chapters are at public universities in the South. And lastly, I also think it's important that we invest in mentorship and consciously developing members into leaders, especially YDSA members into DSA members, and further connecting them to the organization through that.
With a little bit of an order for our questions, but I'm going to scramble that order because I think it makes sense. Sorry, we have a bit of an order for questions, but I'm going to scramble that order because I think it makes sense given what we just talked about. So I'm going to move to what we have listed fourth for y'all, because I think it's related. How do we develop leaders capable of bringing DSA forward in a sustainable way? How do we make this part of our everyday work? I think it's, pretty relevant question if we're talking about developing membership, but how do we kind of, keep everybody here and also create more leaders? Whoever wants to jump in.
We don't have to go in order.
Yeah.
well, I'll take a stab at this. I think as we develop as leaders, you can recognize in other people their leadership capabilities, and that we have to look out for that. And then we have to make sure that they have support as they develop into leaders, that it's, you know, it's not something that particularly women, I think, are taught growing up. And so, and I would say we need to develop women leaders in this organization. It's been fairly male-dominated over the years, and that takes some work. One other thing that I think is important is that we have to not see ourselves as just sort of a part of what's going on, but as actual actors, that we're the people who are going to make a difference, and that the people that we're working with are also the people who are actors in our own lives and in our society.
Yeah, I think to build on what Chris is saying, and also what Jake was just saying about YDSA too, you know, I come from the student organizing world before DSA, and this year in Chicago during the 2023 electoral cycle, it was really interesting. There were multiple times where I ran into people who were volunteers on campaigns for DSA-endorsed electeds, and also other progressives that were running, that were people that I was mentoring and developing like a decade ago, who had moved to Chicago, who had like stayed a part of the movement, and having conversations with them and seeing the path that they have taken. And so in terms of leadership development, and going back to what I said previously, you know, every meeting is an organizing opportunity, and every single conversation is an opportunity to bring somebody closer, to develop that lifelong relationship with people, and also not only with students and young people, especially with students and young people, for those who've been in it for a long time, but also in general too. One of the most important things, I think, is understanding that there's not like a script. Like we're talking about nuts and bolts organizing here. Organizing is not rocket science. There is a basic cycle, and at the same time, there is no script to be able to do this. People are going to make mistakes. People are going to fuck up. But our responsibility when we are developing leaders, when we're in deep relationship with people, is to understand that we're in this for the long haul together, and we're developing each other as leaders together, no matter what, and we're comrades, so.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna quote something that Chris actually told me in a conversation we had maybe a year or two ago. I was talking to former NPC members, just trying to get some insight on what it had been like to be on the NPC. And Chris was just like, well, sometimes all the bullshit doesn't really matter because these are people you're gonna be fighting with for the next 40 years anyway. Which, you know, just gives you a lot of perspective in that sometimes you can have just really intense either political or interpersonal situations with folks, but at the end of the day, I think approaching things with grace, approaching things through a lens of forgiveness in the organization as much as possible can help sort of mitigate some of those tense situations and really remind folks why we're here, what's at stake, and the type of world that we're trying to build is not just going to be built for us. And I think it's in everybody's interest to have an organization that's militant, an organization that's resilient, and particularly an organization that can win. And I think in this moment, things are only going to get tougher. We need to have an organization that can withstand an increasingly hostile political environment. And that also means looking out for our members, making sure that we can do this work as safely as possible while taking care of each other and not really putting ourselves in situations that make it more difficult to do that work, which includes Twitter. Just putting that out there. But really, we can do a lot of things individually, but I think also just organizationally need to be able to look at how we're creating support systems for leaders. I think particularly leaders, women, leaders of color, and also how we're building sort of pipelines of engagement, from areas like YDSA, but also just the different terrains that we're waging campaigns in. Whether that's unionizing different workplaces or through electoral campaigns.
Yeah, I guess just to add on, I think as leaders in the organization, we need to be really intentional about how we're developing leaders and see that as one of our main roles in addition to steering our chapter or committee or whatever body we're on. I'm really proud and humbled to say that 2 members of my YDSA chapter, 2 queer women that I mentored for the past 3 years, were just elected to YDSA's National Coordinating Committee. And it was through, years of working with these members and supporting them as they stepped up for more work that they felt confident and had the experience and skills to step up to that position. I also did want to add on a little bit to share some more information about what YDSA's mentorship program looks like. So right now we have 40 DSA members who are working with individual YDSA chapters across the country to support chapter leaders, help start new YDSA chapters, and create resources to support the work of YDSA mentors. I think this is really crucial work because not only are we developing leaders through this program, but we are connecting YDSA chapters to their DSA chapter and helping YDSA members identify as DSA members. I'd really encourage folks to go to the YDSA table when you get a chance to learn more about this program. And especially if you're someone who's interested in getting involved in that work, I think it's really crucial to growing our organization in the long term.
I'll take off my facilitator hat and jump in real quick to add a little something, and which is that in my experience with developing leaders, I mean, it starts with like having a kind of openness with the people that you're around in an organization. So I'll one little anecdote I'll share is like, I was one of the liaisons to National Political Education Committee and met some folks through that, and there was one member who wanted to get to know a little bit more, did a one-on-one, talked about our kind of experience, what brought us to DSA, what they were interested in, and I thought, kind of filed away in the back of my mind. Interesting dude, cool. Months later, I'm on another committee, and we're looking to staff up that committee with more folks. And I'm thinking about who has a kind of like skill set that might work with this or that they could grow into. And I reached out to them and I was like, hey, you should join this committee. You should join. This is the Growth and Development Committee. They joined, and from what I hear from folks, I was on the committee, but then I went off when I had my daughter in the winter. But from what I hear, this person's been a really big contributor in the committee, and now this person's running for NPC. So it's like, the ways that you can kind of help people along on their journey in developing as leaders starts with having an organizing conversation, having a one-on-one. So these kinds of basic things are really important. I think developing leaders in the organization, just maintaining the relationships that we have as organizers. I'm going to move on to another question, which is about, Kristian touched on some of the kind of tensions that might develop organizationally. So I want to touch on this question about, as an organization, how do we move to build success across various ideological positions in the organization? Now, those ideological positions don't necessarily need to foment tension, but they often do, and sometimes that turns personal and not political, and sometimes it's all messed up and blended together. But I'm wondering what folks think about how we navigate being in a Big Ten organization with various ideological poles.
Yeah, I'll start real quick. What I wanted to share was a little bit of context. As I said, I spent most of my time on the NPC working on turning a priority resolution for the Green New Deal into a campaign with a real strategy. And that priority campaign came from a set of principles that we built as a national eco-socialist working group. I was not at the 2017 convention in Chicago, but as I was getting involved in DSA, I heard from folks that climate change had been not prioritized as one of the top 3 issues because there was not a really coordinated and central cross-ideological organizing that was happening. So myself and other folks from the National Eco-Socialist Working Group, when the Green New Deal exploded onto the political scene in 2018, we developed a set of eco-socialist principles for a Green New Deal, and then we spent time going to the leadership of every chapter that was active at the time, the eco-socialist working groups, and getting something like 60, 70 chapters to sign on to it, getting every single active ideological caucus in the organization at that time to sign on to it, and then taking those principles and turning them into a resolution and getting democratic buy-in all along the way. When COVID hit, we brought together reps from 80 chapters for a 3-day meeting to develop demands and then create a 5-year strategy. That 5-year strategy is what is still informing the Green New Deal Campaign Commission today. So every step along the way, getting that democratic buy-in, doing the organizing work, and making sure to talk to people and integrate across the different priorities that people might have, and that's the blueprint. So,
Well, I have 2 things to say. One, they're rather disparate things. One is, in terms of ideology, I think I'm right. I think I know what we need to do. And I bet you everybody in this room thinks that too. But I'm not a true believer. I don't expect at some point for the rapture of the left to come and Marx will float down from the sky. So I have to believe that even though I'm pretty sure I'm right, I could be wrong. I could be wrong, and so could anybody in this room. And right, we need to bear that in mind, that over the years, I've had people who I have completely disagreed with and thought were obnoxious, and then, 5 years later, we're on the same side, we're good buddies, stuff like that. Second thing that I think Sean really hit on is that if we're organizing, then our ideas about ideology should be related to organizing, and they'll be much more grounded in the real world around us, rather than saying, if I read, Joe Schmo, that's going to tell me the truth. So those are my 2 disparate thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we don't take our internal democracy for granted in DSA. Having a healthy democracy means that we are committed to building that and creating a culture around that. I think what that's looked like in YDSA, kind of similar to what Chris was saying, is our National Coordinating Committee this year has been really committed to facilitating organization-wide discussions when we see major political questions come up in the organizing work that we're doing. So some of the things that has looked like this year is, how do we work with social movement organizations that are not socialist to fight for reproductive justice at the national level? We've talked about how do we orient to the nascent student worker movement and the organizations that are growing out of that, and also how can we organize under right to work and other anti-worker labor laws. And these conversations have helped diffuse tensions in the organization and allowed us to set clear goals that we can move forward to collectively. I think it's also really important that we view political tendencies as a benefit to the organization that help members clarify their politics, and work wherever we can to facilitate cross-tendency discussions and allow them to present their ideas to members.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is just to that point, making sure we're not setting ourselves in our silos. I think that's something that happens a lot in the organization, not just with the various political tendencies, but also with the various issue areas of work that we engage in DSA. I think it can lead to a lot of editorializing, creating narratives that might not actually be the truth. And generally, I feel like once folks are interacting on a regular basis, that some of those tensions, while there might be still the political disagreements, the tensions themselves seem to sort of melt away. And also, in particular, I think like things like our national convention are doing a lot of good work in having folks from various tendencies meeting in person, being able to have these conversations, and also having a fundamental understanding that we're here for the same reason, and that we all have that shared commitment of wanting to see DSA be successful in the demands that we have before us.
Only thing I'll add to that is, I think it's really true that we have to think about whatever our ideological differences may be. It's highly unlikely that we're winning socialism tomorrow. We're probably going to be doing this together for a very long time. It is not wise to alienate people that you're going to be doing stuff with for a very long time. So lead with your politics, but don't be an asshole, is what I would say. Totally doable, by the way. All right. Get into another few questions. This one's pretty present, I think, as we're seeing, the right attack trans youth, attack bodily autonomy, attack all sorts of rights, and do so in a really kind of like, I don't know, the right is kind of feeling itself right now. With the threat of fascism looming, how does DSA show up in these fights?
Yeah, so I think as socialists, we need to really take seriously the threat of fascism and the right, and we need to be steadfast in our opposition to that. I think a lot of YDSA chapters, especially our chapters in the South, are doing really great work that I want to highlight and think DSA chapters can learn a lot from. So at the University of Florida, our YDSA members organized hundreds of students to occupy the building where former Senator Ben Sasse was speaking to students as he was trying to become president of the university. He ended up having to flee the building through a back door escorted by police and has yet to show his face on campus again. Florida International University YDSA has organized mass rallies to protest Don't Say Gay legislation and attacks on academic freedoms, which is galvanizing students to join the struggle and building a base for future organizing. At the University of Louisville in Kentucky, YDSA members are fighting against anti-trans legislation at the state level and working to defend the right to abortion. And at the University of North Texas, our YDSA chapter won a campaign to improve access to HRT on campus for trans and non-binary students. Ultimately, though, I think we need to orient ourselves around power if we truly want to defeat the right, and we need to organize for the long term, especially in strategic industries that can challenge the power of capital. In Florida, I think teachers and teacher unions are at the forefront of the fight against attacks on academic freedom and queer and trans youth. And we need to be uplifting these struggles and thinking about how we as DSA members can support them, join them, and expand them.
Yeah, I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about how we understand racism and sexism in our society. And I think we need to develop an understanding that recognizes that racism and sexism are not ancillary to the main struggle. They're central to it, that they are pillars on which capitalism bases its divisions. So if we look, for example, at trans and LGBTQ issues in Florida, one of the centerpieces of right activity, we also can see that it's not only trans issues, it does include attacks on reproductive freedoms. It includes attacks on critical race theory, okay? And it also ultimately is including, and particularly explicitly, starting to include attacks on teachers and librarians, where we need to support them. We need to take this into our labor organizing. We need to take it into our electoral organizing and think about what's going on with school boards, not just in Florida, but around the country. And we need to take it into the communities to say, you know, these attacks are coordinated. Don't believe Moms for Liberty or whatever that organization is. And we need to do that outreach. We need to be part of these communities so that we can have talks with the people to move them away from belief in some of this stuff that's going on. Clearly, a lot of people believe it, and we need to fight back against that.
Yeah, so I think if you look at the trans-exclusionary radical feminist movement in the UK, it's actually somewhat different than the one in the US, where there's a big split between pro-abortion feminists and anti-trans militants, which doesn't exist as much here in the United States because there's a multiple front that is around bodily autonomy. But I think that that division is a looming threat that could be there, especially if, in the fight to respond to Dobbs, to everything else, to this right-wing explosion, if we see strategy being decided by philanthropy-driven organizations that will take whatever crumbs they can, we could see that happen. And so, that same thing applies when it comes to the international fascist and right-wing wave that is moving from Palestine to India to Hungary, across the world. We see the right wing is cresting in a wave. Again, philanthropy-driven organizations would like nothing more than to make sure that we are focused on domestic issues and only thinking about domestic issues rather than international working class power. And so it is crucial for us to understand all of these root causes, but then also at the same time to be able to talk to people who have never thought about those symptoms and that material basis, and to be able to thread that to develop leaders. And that's why it's so crucial that our organization, our mass member-funded organization that is not beholden to anybody but us, is the one that is deciding strategy and is building power together.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there had to be sort of a simple answer to that, building power through organization. I think in Texas in particular, it feels like a lot of us have been ringing the alarm of what's coming for a very long time. I remember being on a plenary at the 2017 convention, specifically talking about the importance of coming together with our undocumented neighbors and community because of all of the xenophobic and racist language that was being perpetuated by the right wing that has only continued to be exacerbated through, the media, but also, to Sean's point, we're seeing that on an international scale as well. We're seeing the ways that there are a lot of parallels with, the U.S. and what happened with January 6th, with Brazil as well, and seeing how, folks there were able to combat that rising right-wing authoritarianism in a way that was through creating broad electoral coalitions, broad coalitions of social movements. So I think it's also very particularly important that we are constantly doing this outreach and not really taking any demographics, any groups for granted as people that we have on our side, as people that are unreachable. I think there's largely an idea or a misconception that, these people aren't going to agree with us. They're not going to ever be socialists. And while that might be true for right now, there are likely areas where we have commonality, where we're able to work together on various campaigns where there is that mutual self-interest. And I think that's really important because we need thousands of way more people to be on our side, and we need to be a lot more organized because the right is very organized, and they are very, very serious about coming for everything that we have.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that I could add is I think the sense that I get is that the right is like kind of willing to just like go everywhere and talk to whoever. I mean, you know, assuming you're the right skin shade or whatever gender presentation that they might like, but like we need to be willing to go everywhere too. We need to be, I think, engaging with people in their everyday struggles in their lives, and helping politicize their everyday lives. So it's a big task, but I think like that's the only way. Related to that, how are we going to build and engage membership in areas currently underrepresented by DSA? What's it going to look like to develop chapters and branches in those areas? How should we approach geographic growth strategically?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we are intentionally orienting ourselves towards communities where DSA is under-organized or not yet organized, and doing that through organizing around issues that are widely and deeply felt in these communities, and not being afraid of, organizing these communities just because we're not there yet. If that's the orientation that we take, we're never going to reach these people. And I think from the YDSA perspective, some of the things that I'm really excited about in terms of expanding the organization and growing DSA, at our convention this week, we passed a resolution committing us to focus on starting new chapters at public universities and community colleges, which I think will help further root our organization in the working class. The NPC also recently filled the YDSA organizer vacancy, so we now have expanded capacity to start new chapters at historically black colleges and universities, and send our staffers to college campuses where we don't yet have chapters, and identify potential leaders to start new chapters. And I also want to highlight the incredible work that several YDSA chapters across the country are doing to start DSA chapters in their community. So they, came to YDSA because they're socialist and they want to join a socialist organization, and they represent the need for a larger DSA chapter to exist in their community, both to support their work, but to address issues that a YDSA chapter can't. One example of this, two comrades from the University of Florida YDSA chapter, Aaron and Alan, have been really instrumental in starting a DSA chapter in Alachua County in Florida. Which is now an official organizing committee and hopefully will grow into a full chapter in the near future.
Yeah, I want to mention something that we talked about at the MROC Institute a lot, which was just like, don't be weird. And okay, I mean, folks you can continue to be weird. That's not really the issue. It's more of like how we're approaching people. I think one thing that we found a lot of common stories throughout the MROC cohort was that many of us that were people of color in the organization were just like immediately approached for leadership positions, just like as soon as we joined. And for some folks, maybe that was like, it made sense. I know I was recruited from an immigrant rights organization, so I'd been doing organizing for a while. So I felt confident in being able to do that, but I also became co-chair like 2 months into being in DSA. Which is a very fast track way of doing it. Sometimes there's not really any other options, but generally you can feel when somebody's sort of approaching you in a way that's like, oh, look, a person of color, I'm going to recruit them to do this one particular thing. So I think instead just being able to approach folks from a sense of like, how can I support this person in developing their skills? How can I make sure that, you know, the culture that we're creating is also welcoming? And most importantly, that people see that we're taking our work seriously so that they can take us seriously. If we want people to invest their time and energy and resources into this organization, then we need to be doing that with the seriousness that demands, because you know, there's a lot of other things that people could be doing, and it's not necessarily things that are building towards a better world, but it is something that people are, I'll say, like, I feel like this current moment, a lot of folks are sort of reverting inward to themselves, trying to protect what they have, because there's a lot of insecurity that the world is creating. So making sure that we're also giving folks, extending that, that opportunity to folks to make sure that they feel comfortable in making those decisions.
Yeah, I thought this was an interesting question because I think there are a variety of different things that we can respond to in it. One of the things that immediately came to mind was multiracial organizing. And I was struck yesterday when the Chicago City Council member talked about how DSA supported her, but they didn't come doing door-to-door or something. And she said it was because they didn't know the community. And that now Chicago DSA, with, you know, through connections to her, has more in connections with that community. Now I don't know that I've got the whole story right there, but I do think it's something that we should think about, which is, you know, when particularly I think in electoral politics, there's an opportunity to reach out beyond the communities that we live in and to be able to talk to people who are in other races, African American, Hispanic, and so on, and build a relationship with those communities. Now, the other part of this is the geographic, and I think I have thought that for a while that DSA really does need to build in the Midwest. You know, in terms of electoral politics, yes, we have some opportunities to expand our base as we get more people, say, on places like the Chicago City Council, or where I went to college, Northfield, Minnesota, which is a town outside of Minneapolis, St. Paul, that we need to think about how can we use that to expand our membership in areas where it's fairly small right now.
So I'm gonna go kind of fast. People talked about multiracial organizing mostly. The only thing that I have to add to that is that the only way to move in the right direction is to move. Mistakes will be made, and we are going to be a majority white organization for a long time, but that's okay. We are moving in the right direction, and we just need to keep organizing, keep bringing people in, and engage those new constituencies. One of the greatest strengths that we need to lean into more is that we are an organization of queers. We are almost certainly and empirically the largest nationally organized force of LGBTQ people since at least ACT UP, if not before then. The only membership orgs in striking distance are union LGBTQ caucuses, and they represent a bounded population. So when it comes to geographic constituencies, we should be building in places where there are trans and queer people under threat of genocide right now, and creating a political home for them, even more than the political home that we already are, that will allow us to engage more fully in the tensions between identity-based politics and class-wide politics with a more authentic constituency, and also will allow us to engage in those strategic coalitions when we think about independent party-building infrastructure with more densely POC-led membership, if we're bringing to the table that we're an extremely gay organization. The other thing that I want to say too, talking about being opportunistic in a good way, is that we need to use opportunities like this to reach out to LGBTQ plus people. And I want to shout out Chicago DSA member Dallas Knapp, who came up to me yesterday and asked me to do something from the panel here, which I'm going to do. I want everybody to take a second and take out their phones. Right now, Chicago is in a place where we have multiple union formations that are building LGBTQ plus constituencies. Berlin nightclub, one of the best nightclubs in the United States, just unionized, and they are going on strike right now. And so what I want people to do is to take out their phones, go to bit.ly/gays-on-strike. That's bit.ly/gays-on-strike, and you will see a strike fund for these nightclub workers that are part of the vanguard that is reforming the labor movement right now with unapologetically queer and trans working class people that are fully queer, fully working class. Doesn't work? Okay, great. All right, we will touch base. We'll figure out what that is and get that sent out to people so that everybody can donate. But for all the press that's in the room too, y'all should talk about it. We should use opportunities like this every single time we can. We should talk about how DSA is a gay organization. We are the political home of the queer and trans working class. Capital G gays, just like it should be.
Again, bit.ly/G gays-on strike. I'm gonna do like a very quick, what has DSA united around over the last 2 years, if anything? I'm kidding. And what can unite us over the next 2 years? We answer that question, then we're going to go to Q&A. But let's see if we can do a lightning round on that.
I can start with the YDSA perspective, I guess. So I think one of the things that's been really inspiring and productive in YDSA is we've started strategizing and creating a national cohort model where we are taking chapters that are organizing similar campaigns and facilitating relationships with them to collectively strategize, share experiences, and institutionalize knowledge. Out of these cohorts, we've, I think YDSA has been the key factor pushing the undergraduate student worker labor movement forward, and there are currently 30 union drives or unions on campuses across the country that have come as a result of work that YDSA members have been spearheading. I also think in YDSA, our annual winter conference and our summer convention are really productive spaces that enable us to discuss things and come to consensus across tendencies, and I'm really excited that the National Activist Conference proposal passed on the consent agenda, because I think bringing that to DSA will be really helpful for us too.
Well, I think the bottom line is organizing, working on our priority issues. The NPC is going to have to probably do a lot of work in terms of how to make it happen within the budget constraints that we have. But I think from yesterday, it seems pretty clear that the priority issues are not separable, that the electoral piece has to be connected with the labor piece, has to be connected with the Green New Deal and so on, that we have to have this perspective in our organizing that these are interconnected. But again, bottom line is what's going to bring the organization together and forward is organizing.
I mean, I think first and foremost is that we see DSA as the best political vehicle for socialism in this country in the longest time. Yeah, maybe. Just making sure. Thought there was more unity on that. And I think that means making sure that we're investing in a strong organization. And one of the ways that we do that is one of the biggest ways that we stand out from other organizations in that we are member funded, which is super important for us to be able to maintain our independence in the work that we do. And so that also means making hard asks. And I'll just take a moment to pitch income-based dues, which is very important. I know a lot of folks were at the socialist soiree last night. We're donating. I know Sean was, working it there. And so if you haven't already, really encourage folks to visit the GDC table and find out more about how you can switch to income-based dues to make sure that we're investing in a socialist organization that can carry out the work that we are passing this weekend.
Yeah. The only thing that I'll add, I think synthesis is like the biggest point that I have seen from my vantage point, not being in the national leadership or as involved in national organizing and instead focusing on local organizing. Taking the priorities that were passed at the 2021 convention, the beginnings of the ways that we were working on Green New Deal national pushes, seeing that filter into local chapters, into state chapters, seeing the way that the Green New Deal for public schools started as a federal appropriations push and then became a priority chapter in LA. It became what the Chicago Teachers Union was able to consolidate around with a climate justice committee and has percolated out from there, seeing the way that in Chicago we were able to synthesize labor and electoral work last October while we got ready to endorse a round of candidates, while also keeping our eye on the horizon of a potential UPS Teamsters strike, knowing that all of those elements could come together, writing a campaign plan and then sticking to that campaign plan, making sure that we were able to leverage our position within the national organization and work with people on the NLC and then create the Strike Ready campaign, which has led to this huge outpouring of solidarity, everybody being strike ready, and then now all of us here in the room for the largest gathering of organized socialists in the United States since the 2019 convention in Atlanta. That is unity, that is power, that is what has the capitalist class quaking in their boots, is us being together in this room, and don't fucking forget it.
All right, so let's go to some Q&A until the end of the session. We have until 10:30. People can queue up at the mics on either side. I think we've got some runners, right?
Howdy.
Yeah.
Alexander Hernandez, thank y'all for your service. Much appreciated. This is sort of a little bit of a follow-up to the last question. And I'm actually going to quote Chris here from her 2019 speech at convention and ask y'all what do you think has changed, if anything? Part of it goes, we have, excuse me, dropped my glasses. It's the mask, I apologize. It says here, we have accomplished too little, too many grievances, complaints, etc. Many people elected were new and didn't know how much work it would be. Too many crises instead of strategic conversations. This is not good for the MPC or the organization. To the new MPC, do not repeat our mistakes. Do not focus on incrimination. Act like a leadership body should. What will strengthen us? What will make us a force in American politics? So my question to y'all is, what has changed, if anything, and what will make us that force? Thank you.
Well, I'm surprised. I do vaguely remember this once Alexander started going into it. I left the NPC in 2019, so I don't know exactly what's been going on with the NPC. It doesn't seem quite as fractured as it was in the 2 years there that I was on, where there were really terrible disputes, differences that made the NPC not functional. My impression is that under Kristian's leadership, that hasn't been as true, although I know there have still been fights. And I think that post-2019, there was an effort to build the organization into something that did have priorities, that stuck to those priorities, that didn't let differences get in the way of that. There's still a ways to go, no doubt about it. The organization isn't perfect yet and probably won't be, but I think we're heading in the right direction.
I would just say that what has changed since then is that there was a global pandemic that killed millions of people and hollowed out every single remnant of mass organization, including this one that was left in the United States, and that we spent a lot of time in those 2 years from 2019 to 2021 doing what we could to come together, unify, to create that organizational infrastructure, and that we were able to keep a solid foundation. I think also, we are dealing with the climate crisis coming faster and harder than any scientist predicted. The country of Iran is about to shut down entirely for 2 days because of heat waves, to say nothing of the air quality and everything else. We are in the task right now of us organizing as hard and as fast as we can for the rest of our lives, and things are still going to get worse no matter what, but that doesn't mean that we give up the fight, because every moment that we spend, every minute that we building organization, creating that solid foundation is something that is going to create a lasting, strong foundation for future generations and for us. And that I think people are starting to understand the stakes of that in really true and deep ways, and understanding that this is a sacrifice, and it is something that we are going to be in this struggle for the rest of our lives.
I think to Sean's point, so much of the political climate is increasingly hostile to us, and I think that that's sort of creating the urgency of the task before us while understanding that the type of work that we need to do takes time. So I think sometimes there's that frustration of not being where we want to be. But I think it's really important for us, as Marxists, to be very material about where we are, and really operating from that place, right? We can't operate from a place of our potential, but of where we are in this moment, and what we can do long term. I think it's been great to see folks really reaching out. I want to also just specifically highlight the work of our international committee in reaching out to comrades from all over the world, and being able to talk to folks who are engaging in struggles that are very similar to ours in other parts of the world. And one of the main things that I constantly hear from those folks is that they need us to win. In the heart of empire, they need us to win, right? There are people rooting for us all over the world to win. Chavez is watching. Sorry, Sean just said Chavez is watching. But I mean, for real, it makes a big difference to know that there are people who are supporting us in doing that work. And I think that given that, it's also really important that us as an organization, I think regardless of what comes out this weekend in terms of the things that pass, regardless of the NPC that ends up getting elected, we need us all to come together to root for those things and those people to succeed. Because that is who we've collectively decided. We need to uphold our collective decisions, and we need to do that with the fervor that's needed, and also making sure, I mean, for me, regardless of who ends up on the next NPC, I'm very much committed to supporting that NPC and being successful and being able to carry out the political will of this body, because the things that we're doing here matter. Otherwise, why are we here? So again, keeping in mind that there are people who want us to succeed, and I think we need to want us to succeed just as much.
Yeah, I think I'll just go back to a point I made earlier, which is that to have an internal democracy, we need to be committed to building that and working with people in the organization to build that. I think oftentimes we're very quick to react to things, and all of us would benefit from slowing down a bit, processing the political debates that we're having with comrades, and thinking about how can we put our politics first and avoid kind of descending into interpersonal conflicts. I think, I guess I'll just end there.
I think we can go to the next question.
I'd like to come back to the question of sort of the ultra-right and fascism and what Kristian was just referring to in terms of, an environment that's hostile to us in terms of thinking about 2024. Because in this convention, it seems to me that a lot of the debates and resolutions are focused in one way or another on the relationship of DSA to the Democrats, and we're not actually focusing that much on the ultra-right and what our relationship there is. And I'm not putting this forward as an argument about anything to do with the Democrats, but about the problem of every time I try and raise this in Portland, the immediate pivot is, we've got to find other ways to fight the fascists, but we got to break with the Dems or whatever, some other kind of position, right? And what I want to ask about is, it seems like the Democrats are determined to nominate Joe Biden, and he's a weak candidate, and I don't see anybody who's going to be to Joe Biden what Gene McCarthy was in 1968, who drove Johnson out of the 68 race. So I think there's a very good likelihood that some MAGA candidate is going to win the presidency. And what should DSA be doing to prepare for that kind of eventuality? And that's partly in terms of fighting for the communities who are going to need to be having defense, but also it's about us. The possibility that DSA itself may become a target of the revanchism. They were already resentful in 2016, 2020, and they're even more so now, So what should DSA do to be prepared for the possibility of a MAGA presidency?
I'll just jump in real quick and say that this was a question in fall of 2020 that we engaged in very seriously based on the democratic decision that was made at the 2019 convention, the Bernie or Bust resolution, and seeing the possibility of a coup happening in November 2020, and making a strategic decision that we were going to mobilize our chapters, have people recruit as many members as possible, prepare for any potential political reality, be in strategic coalition with other organizations that were getting ready for mass demonstrations. Those organizations, that coalition, with the threat of possible street violence in a few isolated cities, they tried to demobilize everybody. DSA was one of the only organizations that had their people go out on the street and actually ensure that our members were mobilized for whatever happened. It was them, and it was like CTU here in Chicago threatening a general strike. That was about it. And we caught a lot of shit for it from a lot of NGO people for putting our members in danger. But you know what? We actually were able to build bonds. We were able to have people flood into into the organization in November 2020, and we need to be thinking very seriously about what that looks like and creating those strategies for 2024 election as well, is that no matter what happens with the things that are outside of our control, with the things that are inside our control, we need to build organization and we need to be prepared to stand up for each other no matter what happens.
I mean, I'll also say, I think, yes, one, preparation is key, but also, like, we aren't just sort of witnessing things. We can prevent things by making very strategic interventions, by not just sort of relegating ourselves to having things happen to us, but making things happen. And I think that part of that is, when we were discussing this in 2020, and again, I think there's very similar conditions in 2024, and this is part of a conversation that we had on the NPC just recently about the 2024 elections, is like, we can not like what the race is or whatever, but it doesn't mean it isn't happening. And it doesn't mean that it isn't important to engage with the fact that a lot of people are going to be looking at this and acknowledging that this is something that, if there is an outcome where someone like Donald Trump is president again, it's only going to exacerbate the political conditions that we're organizing under. It's only going to exacerbate the culture wars that the right is winning. It is going to continue to move the Republican Party further and further to the right, to the point where some of the things that they're brazenly saying now are things that were being said by folks that were considered fringe, in 2020. And we have to take that seriously. And I think for DSA, that does not mean endorsing Joe Biden, but it does mean, I mean, in case people were worried, that's not what it means. But what it does mean is that making sure that we are making sure that people are giving people a reason to go out and vote. And I think that means making sure that we are running Democratic Socialist candidates all across the country who are going to drive people to the ballot box to make sure that they are making themselves be heard in whatever liberal democracy we have left, because it's also important that while it's not perfect, that we protect every right that we have, because again, they are coming for every right that we have. So we have to protect the things that we have now and then continue to move the needle forward. And I think that's really important, and I'm not afraid to say that's super important for us, particularly in areas where right-wing violence looks a lot different. People are carrying AR-15s in Texas on a regular fucking basis. It's not child's play. So making sure that we're taking the stakes seriously, not just saying, well, at least we kept our hands clean. We're sitting here with a pure ideological position. Well, that's great. People are fucking dying. So I think we need to move past that.
Yeah, I think DSA really needs to orient itself very seriously towards the millions of people across this country who are seeing this shift to the right, but don't know what they can do about it and are feeling scared. I think we need to be leaders and pushing to grow social movements against attacks on our rights. This October, we held a day of action across the country in YDSA for reproductive justice that turned 5,000 students out on more than 50 college campuses across the country. And our abortion access campaign at NYU grew out of that day of action. So I think we need to think about how can we mobilize people and use that to spearhead longer-term organizing projects. And I said this earlier on the question about fascism on the panel, but ultimately, the only thing that can defeat the far right's power is if we build power of our own. We need to commit to doing the long-term, deep organizing work of building class consciousness, creating a militant worker movement in this country that can challenge the power of the far right head-on. Anything else will not be enough.
Well, there's not much I can add to what's been said because I agree with it. I do want to say that I'm not sure the reference to 1968 is right. I remember going to Wisconsin in '68, being clean for Gene, organizing students, and that fact that McCarthy won in Wisconsin meant that Johnson got out of the race. Nothing like that I can see is going to happen this year. There's a few candidates, Marianne Williamson and Cornel West, But there isn't the mobilization that there was around McCarthy. The second thing is I say that I'm the original Pollyanna. I'm always looking for those happy outcomes, and I think they'll occur. And while it might not be exactly the happy outcome we want, I don't take for granted that Trump is going to win. These criminal cases against him are ongoing. I don't think we know what effect that might have. I don't think we know what effect any Supreme Court decisions might have. And I think that there is every possibility that Biden will win, and that we need a strategy of what to do to build our ranks as sort of the Democratic neoliberal position folds. So we need to think about, Trump is over here, Biden's over here. What happens if each of them win? What's our strategy? What kind of organizing do we need to do? And how can we, in either case, fight the right, which is going to continue its attacks?
So just what I want to do we're going to do 2 more questions, but I'd like the next 2 people in line to ask their questions, and then the group can answer both of your questions. So we only have a little bit of time left. So I see Miriam at the mic.
Hi, I'm Miriam. I'm from Queens, New York. I enjoyed listening to you all and hearing you address a lot of the things I'm thinking about. One of the things I've been struggling with a lot is the question of which, I forget your name, the youth section person, YDSA person.
Jake.
Jamie?
Jake.
Sorry. When you said that we should be setting the strategies for projects we're engaged with other groups, because I have a problem with how often DSA seems to say we're not going to be part of any coalition we don't start or we don't run. And I particularly think that becomes an issue when we are either in a geographic community that we're not that big in, or a demographic community. So you're in a black neighborhood and your chapter doesn't have that many blacks, or an issue in which we haven't had a big presence. And I thought it would be interesting to hear people talk about how we participate in things where we're not the natural leaders and we want to make sure that it meets certain criteria for us, but maybe we're proving ourselves in that coalition. Or maybe when do we just join something to help? So that's all.
Next question.
All right. Hey, comrades. Diana, she, her, with New York City DSA, but a University of Florida alumni. Go Gators. I used to organize with the United Faculty of Florida there, my first organizing job. So great to hear from YDSA at UF. My question is really about some of the reflections that you all shared about being in this together for the long haul and what that really means for us in terms of that we're going to fuck up, that we're going to make mistakes, and how do we lose gracefully, and how do we integrate lessons into our organizing moving forward. I'm wondering if you all could share from your personal experiences moments in which you've made a mistake or moments in which you've gone the wrong direction. How have you redirected? How have you lost gracefully? How have you integrated lessons into your organizing? And then the other part is we are going to have conflict. We are going to have disagreement. How do we turn that maybe interpersonal conflict into camaraderie political disagreement where we can come out as a better or as better organizers moving forward? Thank you.
Thank you. That's it for questions. So we're just gonna panel's going to answer those questions, and then we're going to wrap up.
Well, the second question first. I mean, the most immediate mistake that comes to mind was, as a member of that NPC, some of the events at the very first meeting, I think, drove the NPC apart in a way, and I was chairing, and I think I didn't do an effective job at that, but it taught me some lessons that I think ultimately didn't help that NPC, but maybe helped the future workings of the different NPCs. And I think, you know, if I could go back and do it over again, there are things I would do differently, but we haven't invented time travel yet, so no such luck. On the coalitions, I would be interested in what Jacob says, but I do think that we need to think about coalitions. If we think about the political spectrum in the United States, well, here, this is your left, I guess, looking up here. We're over here, and then we have somewhere along here the neoliberal Democrats, and then we come over here to the Republicans and the right. Now, there are groups to our left, but if we think about we want to be 200,000 or 1 million members in the next several years, where are those members going to come from? They're going to come from over here, to our right, but to our immediate right. And so we need to be in coalitions where we're actually working with those people and have opportunities to interact with them that will allow us to grow our membership and convince them that where they need to be is in DSA.
Yeah, I think building on that, there's definitely a lot of work that happens in coalitions that DSA is not leading in that socialists should be supporting, both because we want to win material demands for the working class, but also because the working class is the only agent of change, and we need to move workers into action, whether or not they're socialists yet. But I think it's important that we as DSA members are constantly orienting around the question of how can we use our work to grow the socialist movement. So I think even if we're not leading in a coalition, it's important that we are bringing our socialist politics to it, that we're identifying as DSA members, and that we are connecting the issue that this coalition is organizing around to the fight for socialism. On the second question, I think it's really important that we build a culture of reflection in the organization, and that doesn't come unless we are very intentional about it. We should be carving out times to debrief our organizing campaigns, whether they're successful or losses, and not just have those conversations, but really think about how can we institutionalize this knowledge and how are we actually going to apply it to our future work. Something we've done the past 2 years on the National Coordinating Committee is hold an in-person retreat before our winter conference in YDSA, and that's allowed us to really just look at the entire past 6 months of our term and then use that reflection to set the priorities for the rest of our term so that we can use the time we have left to have the biggest impact in the world.
In terms of mistakes, so my first or second year of organizing when I was still a student at UC San Diego, I was serving on student government and also part of a group called the Student Sustainability Collective. We were leading a BDS campaign on campus. I had just joined the National Leadership for Students for Justice in Palestine. I was also building the California Student Union. And this is not me rattling off a list of accomplishments. This is me talking about how I was working myself to the bone. It was my last year of college. I was so burned out that I was snapping at people. I was not following through on basic tasks. And somebody took me aside and had a sit down with me and was like, Sean, you are really burnt out right now. You need to take a break. And this is like a lesson that I've learned somewhat, and I think I've gone through cycles of taking on a lot of work, getting burnt out, taking a break, and then there being a convincing political case or an emotional case to step back in, sometimes sooner than I would like, but still taking that on. And each time it has brought reflection, and each time I think back to that interaction that we had right when I was forming my organizing habits. And so that's something that for me is really important, is to think about as people are starting to engage in the lifelong work of being a socialist militant, of being cadre, of being the standing army that we are in this room. The lessons and the habits that you form and have formed now are going to inform the work that you do for the rest of your life, and you will remember all of these things. So think about them as you bring them in, and that goes for coalitions too. And it's why, for me, we need to engage strategically in coalitions, because we need to be building our power as an independent base. It's the only reason our member-funded independent organization, our power comes from how many people we can fucking bring to a meeting and how many people we can show up at a demonstration. And that's fine to not be leading a coalition. We should be doing it strategically, but we don't want to burn out our leaders who also have to bring the organization along and train more leaders who can train more leaders. That's something Ella Baker said in the 60s. That was her definition of a leader. I agree with it extremely strongly. It's the only path forward.
All right, that's our panel. I want to thank our panelists, Kristian, Sean, Chris, and Jake. Let's get a round of applause for our panelists.